Alright, it's time for another update and forecast on the Washburn Fire. Throughout this video, we're going to look at where the fire currently is, where it's likely to spread into the future, some of the main concerns, and then also just especially that fire weather forecast to see what we can expect as we move forward. So the first thing that I always like to do in these videos is just get a visual representation of what the fire looks like right now. Best way to do that is by looking at the satellite imagery where you can see the smoke from the Washburn Fire coming up right here. Again, this is in 30 miles south of Yosemite Valley, and there's two key areas that we're thinking about. It's the Mariposa Grove and the Wawona area. But if we want to zoom in here and get a closer look, as you would expect, it does look like we are getting more smoke as we're getting into these afternoon hours where the temperature goes up, the relative humidity goes down. This is the exact same thing that we saw yesterday, where hot, dry, windy conditions, that's always the key thing that you look at for wildfire. Hot, that one's pretty intuitive. Warmer it is, the worse wildfire is going to be. Winds, for a number of reasons. One, it supplies more oxygen to the fire, which is something that fire needs to survive, along with heat and fuel. And then relative humidity, or winds, winds can lead to spot fires. I need to go back over. Temperature, warmer it is, the worse your wildfire is going to be. Winds can provide more oxygen, but more importantly, something that we've seen on this fire is it can lead to spot fires, where it picks up burning embers. You can imagine a burning ember in this plume right here, traveling right here past any retardant lines that they've dropped down here, and then dropping those burning embers into these dry fuels and creating a new little fire that can then spread on its own. Now, another thing that can happen with these fires that I think you can see an example of is you can get so much heat generated that the fire starts to create its own weather, and it almost looks like we're getting some swirling winds in here, which is exactly what these fires can do. It's one of the main things that we've studied at San Jose State. And then finally, the big aspect, I think most important aspect, you could debate winds are the most important, but relative humidity is also crucial because notice all these fuels that look extremely dry. A lot of them actually look dead. When you have low relative humidity, it makes those fuels even drier, especially those fine fuels. And the drier fuel is, the easier it is for a fire to ignite, like one of those spot fires, but then more importantly, the easier it is for that fire to spread. So that's kind of the fire behavior triangle in as concise of a version as I could put it. Next, let's just go over to the map and see where some of that growth has been recently. Again, you can see where this is. It's almost directly east of San Jose, 30 miles south of Yosemite Valley. We can see that up top here. There's Yosemite Valley, there's Half Dome. 30 miles to the south, we have the fire right here. There's North Wawona, and then there's that Mariposa Grove. That's what you've most likely been hearing a lot about on the news because that's where there's 500 giant sequoias that have been around for 2,000 years, and that's kind of the news's main concern, but I'm going to put forward kind of some evidence that we might not actually have to be concerned as we think about the Mariposa Grove, which I think is some pretty good news right there. But the first thing I want to do with this map, I always like doing this, and I didn't do an update and forecast video yesterday. I'd like to take Mondays off because I work the double weekend shifts at KSBW on Saturday morning, Saturday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night. So usually like to take it easy on Monday. But what we can do with this fire is that's what it looked like as of July 10th. This is where the growth was yesterday. You notice push down right here. I wonder if this highway is labeled right here. So that's Wawona Road right there. You notice how it pushes right up against Wawona Road and then stops right there. That's not a coincidence. It's almost like a fuel break, and I would imagine that all the wildfire personnel on this fire have specifically used that road as kind of a fuel break in this situation to try to stop the fire in its tracks right there. I imagine they'll try to do the same thing down here as well. So most of that grove, though, you notice to the north and the northeast, this was something that we've talked about in recent forecast videos. Afternoon winds have mostly been, overall, they've been from the southwest. That's been the overall directional pattern. But something that also happens on these fires is during the day, winds like to push up canyon. So you would get winds pushing up this slope and then trying to push the fire up in that area, which is where you can see there was a lot of growth recently. So finally, let's see what the most recent flight can tell us. This is the one that it's as of today, which means this most likely doesn't include the recent growth this afternoon, but it's the most recent data we have, so it's the best we have to work with. Yeah, so interesting to see this. Keep your eye on that road down there where we were saying that the fire is most likely going to push up to there but then stop just like it did over here. And it looks like that's the case, but there is one big concern right there. Looks like we did get a spot. That's what I was just talking about, why winds are important on this fire. You have that nice fuel break right there on Wawona Road, but what winds can do, take a burning ember right here, drop it into these fuels that I might say looks like there's a lot of dead and dry fuels in this situation. Oh man, Google Earth is amazing. And then it drops a little spot fire right there. And the reason that's bad is there was obviously lots of hard work to get this fire stopped in its tracks, and then one little spot fire can kind of not eliminate that progress, but certainly make things more difficult than they otherwise would be. Now, we can also see that it has been pushing closer towards Wawona right here. I mentioned that we get up canyon winds during the day. The opposite happens at nighttime where you get down canyon winds, and that's where we have seen some of the growth on this side. And then over on this side, this has been the most active part of the fire. We have a lot of fuels in here. You also notice it's a very steep slope. So that's another part of fire behavior, or I guess I gave the fire weather triangle earlier. Fire behavior triangle is fuel, weather, topography. And this side of the fire has really had all three of those things. Fuel, we can zoom in there, you can see some of that. Obviously it's a lot of fuel, but you also notice some of those brown patches where it looks like it's very dead and dry fuel. About 97% of the state in that severe drought category right now. So fuel's there, weather's been there, we've had a warming and drying pattern over the last couple of days. Unfortunately, that's going to be continuing over the next week. But then topography is also a very big aspect, because almost like if you tilted a match, you notice how the flame tilts up and then it burns that match faster? The same thing that happens when you have a fire on a slope. Some of that flame tilts towards the vegetation above it. It's able to preheat it, and then by the time the fire gets there, it's just ready to combust. So that's one of the big reasons topography is important. Another one is it just influences those winds. Those winds pick up, and then you get these spot fires that we're seeing right here. Looks like even more on this side, which is part of the reason we've had a lot of growth there. Some decent winds in that direction. So that's what the fire looks like as of our most recent data. Got that spot right there. We'll have to see what happens with that one. And then we're also going to have to watch this northeastern section because that's been fairly active. Keeping an eye on Wawona because that's where we have the most structures and we have had some growth in that area recently. But I do want to talk about Mariposa Grove really quickly. This has been one of the big, you could say, concerns for, I would say, most of the media coverage on this because of the 500 giant sequoias that are, again, 2,000 years old. Amazing living species right there. But there is actually some good news when it comes to this regard. One part of the good news is that giant sequoias are actually adapted to live with the fire regime in California. And it's honestly amazing to hear some of the ways that it's adapted. The giant sequoia's seeds are in cones that can actually lay dormant for 20 years until the heat of a fire clears out a bunch of the competing vegetation, and then the heat actually pops open that cone, stimulates the seeds to germinate, and then now that little, I don't know what you call it, seedling, sapling, sprout, is in just an area with bare ground, not many competing plants, and then it's able to just take root and grow into a giant sequoia. So it's not only important for that part of the life cycle, but it also has, once it grows up, it has extremely thick bark that has fire-resistant tannin in it. And then it also engages in self-pruning, which we actually might be able to see if I click on one of these pictures right here. You notice how there's no branches or leaves on the bottom of this tree? But then if you look at, like, that's the top of another, that one's not the best example. If this picture kept going up, we would be able to see, there's a good one. Self-pruning, all the branches are off on the bottom of the tree. Then you have the canopy up above. The reason for that is because they're adapted for a fire to come through here, go around their fire-resistant bark, and then the canopy is safe up there. So, very interesting adaptations to live with fire. Where things can get bad is it's not exactly fire that's the threat to giant sequoias, but it's actually fire exclusion. Because if you have a tree like this, it's pretty safe if a fire comes through. But if you don't allow fires to happen and clear out vegetation, then you can get some fir trees in here, some brush, all kinds of stuff. And then that can create flames that are so tall that it can jump into the giant sequoia's canopy. It can also just create so much heat that it overwhelms that natural adaptation of fire-resistant bark. So you actually want to have fires to simulate the natural ecosystem so that these trees can do what they've evolved to do. And that's actually where the good news comes in. There have been a large amount of prescribed burns throughout the entire Mariposa Grove, and you can actually tell if we zoom in here. If you zoom way over here, you notice that is just nothing but trees and vegetation right there. If we zoom into Mariposa Grove, you notice it's much clearer. It's not just constant vegetation, and a big reason for that is because of the prescribed burning that they've been doing. So I would say when it comes to Mariposa Grove, it's less that these trees are under attack by fire and we should be worried, but it's more of like a success story for prescribed burning, creating a more natural ecosystem and allowing these sequoias to do what they do, which is live with fire. So that was quite a tangent right there, but I've been doing a lot of research on that kind of stuff recently, so I just wanted to share it with everybody because honestly I think all that stuff's pretty cool. But again, that's where the map is right now, or with the most recent data that we have for that kind of map. Now we can look at some other maps to try to figure out where the most growth is going on. So there's that recent fire perimeter that we were just looking at. Then those little red dots show where the satellite imagery is picking up recent hotspots. Looks like we do still have a couple on this side and maybe a couple that have jumped over Wawona Road. So we're going to have to see if we have more spot fires down on that side. And then it also looks just like the most active part of this fire has been on the northeast. Looks like a few more spot fires there, but overall, not that many hotspots, I will say. Doesn't look like it's extremely active, and then does look like there's a few more closer to Wawona. But overall, just looking at that map, that's not nearly as bad as what this map would most likely look like if this was 2 months from now where the fuels are even drier. Now, another way we can look at this, again, this one I always do kind of a disclaimer on because it makes the fire look much bigger than it actually is, but it's also the most recent information that we can get a hold of, so it's useful to show. Those are those hotspots that we were just looking at. Most of that action, again, on that northeastern section. If we look at the all satellites, this kind of tells you where it's picking up the heat. Looks like most of that heat, again, on that northeastern section. I wouldn't say that's a big surprise there, so just like tying that in with these images, that's the northeastern section that we're looking at right there that has that big smoke plume. And I would say, I didn't look at this fire much yesterday, but I believe yesterday was hotter and drier than today. But that's the most smoke that I've seen coming up off this fire. Again, yesterday might have been more, but that's at least more than the 9th and 10th looked when we were looking at those live shots. One other very interesting thing to look at is fire history, because this goes along with what I was saying about Mariposa Grove. If we look at fire history, you have the South Fork fire right there. I wonder if I can just do perimeters only. No, it doesn't look like it. So we're gonna go to detections, no, modus and veers. That's probably the best one. South Fork Fire is right there. And last time that I looked at the fire perimeter of the Washburn and the South Fork, it was bumping right into the South Fork and then basically just stopping. Big reason for that, the South Fork cleared out a lot of these fuels in 2017. So where there's no fuel, it's that part of the fire triangle where it needs heat, oxygen, fuel. Where there's no fuel, the fire will at least slow down and possibly just stop in its tracks. So that's also some good news right there when it comes to the northern progression. You notice though we're not seeing any recent fires to the east here. So most likely going to see that side continue. And then similar story for that section that's going closer towards Wawona. Does look like there's hot spots and then there's a lot of area that hasn't burned in a long time. So next thing we can do is check out Watch Duty, my new favorite app when it comes to following wildfires. They had an update at 9:30, said fire remains very active this morning along the northeastern side. Okay, glad that goes along with what we've been saying. Southern ridgeline is holding well, with no spots across, but progression out to the east is expected. That's also what we just said, because again, no fire history to that east, so there is a lot of fuel, steep topography, conditions are warm and dry moving forward. And then updated acreage from fires puts the fire at 3,523 acres and is 22% contained. 649 personnel on this. So that's higher than we have seen recently. Another way to get that kind of information is from Inciweb. And we've already kind of gone over the summaries recently. Fuels in the fire path. That's kind of a key sentence right there. Most of these trees are over 2,000 years old and have experienced fire many times throughout their lives. So that's another good thing to think about. If you're very worried about these giant sequoias, they've survived a lot of fires. And I believe the fire return interval in this area is about like every 10 years or something when fires aren't being suppressed. But again, great job with all the prescribed fire up there. So not too worried about that Mariposa Grove. So looking down here, combination of continued warm and dry conditions along with heavy accumulation of large fuels is creating the perfect recipe for very active fire behavior we are seeing. So that's kind of your fire behavior triangle right there. And yep, also fire activity increases each afternoon when temperatures are at their highest and relative humidities are at their lowest. And this is expected, and it's not a direct threat to the giant sequoias. So that's actually some great news right there, that they're even saying not a huge threat to the giant sequoias. Yeah, I think that's some good information right there. Evacuations and closures, we'll look at that map in a second. First, I just want to see, so I think that has to be updated. The Watch Duty one seems to be more up to date with that. 3,523 acres, 22% contained. Moderate fire behavior observed, that kind of goes along with what we're saying, where there's certainly growth on this, but it doesn't look exactly extreme. Certainly not compared to some of the other fires that we've covered throughout this channel, including Dixie, Caldor, all those big ones. And I think from there, it's a lot of the stuff that we've already gone over. So I just want to show evacuation map. As always, you most likely are watching this video not live, so don't take this as the current evacuations. Always just look at that link in the description, mainly just showing you this to show that this is a resource. Now I want to get to my favorite part, because this is kind of my background. I'm a broadcast meteorologist at KSBW, so I like to see what the conditions are like on this fire, because as we've been reading and seeing throughout this fire, that is a big indication of how it's going to change in the future. So we can see if it's expected to get worse, expected to get better. Now if we look at this afternoon, let's actually go to 4 o'clock. That's usually when you get your high temperatures for the day. Wind gusts, 25 miles per hour. I would say that's moderate, and it's expected for kind of this kind of area. You get those up canyon winds. It's at least not 50 or 60 miles per hour. That's when fires get really extreme. And you notice once again coming from the southwest, that's a big part of the reason that most of our growth has been towards the northeast. Just pushes those flames forward, also picks up those burning embers, and leads to that fire growth. Now temperature today, 83 degrees. I believe that's slightly less than yesterday. Last time I checked, Monday was the peak of the warming trend, and then we were just staying warm and dry for the rest of the week. Humidity down to 21%. That was what we've seen from other resources too. Humidity about 20 to 30% most of these days, which isn't terrible. Things get really bad when you're under 17% and then extreme when you're in those single digits. But 21% is certainly still warm and qualifies as warm and dry conditions. Looks like for Wednesday, we'll just go one day in the future here. It looks like it's a 21% again. Temperatures 81 degrees, so that's maybe some good news. No, that's not good news. That's still pretty warm. Definitely warmer than that threshold of 75 degrees where extreme behavior becomes more likely. Winds, exact same story again, 26 miles per hour from the southwest. So if I had to make a prediction for this fire, again, this is, I would say, a pretty safe bet, but considering we don't have a lot of fire history right here, considering how steep that topography is, considering all those spot fires, considering all the hot spots that we're currently seeing, and the fact that we're going to remain warm and dry the next few days, looks like there's a lot of dry fuel right there, and we have those southwesterly winds. I would say this is going to be the area of the fire that we'll expect the most growth, and we'll continue to watch as things progress. So hopefully this video is helpful. I'll maybe try to record another video in like 5 minutes that's maybe 3 minutes long, just with the most important details, so you can stick around if you want to hear that one as well. So hope this was helpful and that you all have a great day.